Hi, welcome to Heritage Open Days in Bath. My name is Prof Morrison. I'm the author of The Regency Revolution, Jane Austen, Napoleon, Lord Byron, and the Making of the Modern World. Food is one of the topics that I cover in the book. It's a fascinating area in Regency culture, and it's what I'm going to speak to you about today. I'm going to start by telling you just when exactly the Regency period occurred, and then highlight some of the most fascinating aspects of food and drink and food consumption and debates over food. So the Regency began in 1811 when King George III collapsed into some form of insanity, and his position on the throne was taken by his eldest son, the dissolute Prince of Wales, who became the Prince Regent. He served as the Prince Regent until 1820, when George III died and the Prince Regent became King George IV. So we're talking about a period that's roughly 200 years ago, 210 years ago it started. So the Prince of Wales was a great consumer of food and drink. He had enormous appetites and became a very overweight man during the Regency because of his vast consumption. He was lucky. There were many people in the British Regency who did not have enough to eat. Their cause was taken up by a radical journalist named William Cobbett, who railed against the inequitable distribution of food in the period. It was possible, and very unfortunately, for people to starve to death in the British Regency, and Cobbett took their part. He was known as the poor man's friend. For those people who were working poor but had enough to eat, their diet was consisted mainly of potatoes and of bread. It was not a great diet, and many of them were in poor health, but it was enough to stay alive. If you move further up the social hierarchies, you get to a family like William Wordsworth and his wife and children in the Lake District. Wordsworth was a long way from starving, but didn't have a lavish diet, couldn't afford a lavish diet. And so Wordsworth and his family ate mainly fresh bread, milk, cheese, and a kind of oatmeal gruel that was boiled in brine. It was simple, but the family was healthy. And as far as we can tell, it was perfectly satisfactory. There were also sweets, especially plum pudding on the holidays, and as you might expect, at Christmas. Vegetarianism is not something that very many people in the Regency thought about or knew about, but there is one very famous vegetarian, and that's a radical poet named Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley is the husband of Mary Shelley, who of course we know as the author of Frankenstein, a novel that was written in part in Bath. In 1813, Shelley published something called The Vindication of Natural Diet, in which he advocated eating vegetables and drinking water. For Shelley, it was a question of human cruelty. He felt that humankind would be happier and more peaceable if we did not kill animals. At the time, it made him something of a laughingstock. Now, of course, Shelley seems far more prophetic in his attitude toward diet and food consumption. In the best houses, in people with some money or considerable amounts of money, what is most notable about their food consumption is its extraordinary excess. The amount of food that would be served in the best houses is remarkable. There is a Welsh diarist named Rhys Howell Gronow who describes going to these lavish parties and how they began with mulligatawny and turtle soup. And following that course, there was fresh salmon and other forms of fish. Following that course, there was mutton and, of course, roast beef. And following that, there was fowl and tongue and ham. And following that, there was dessert, a wide variety of desserts. So this was an occasion for a great amount of food consumption in many of the finest houses, prepared not by English chefs, but by French chefs. There's also a scene in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice in which Mrs. Bennet proudly announces that her daughters do no food preparation. That is, the family has enough money that the daughters are not called upon to prepare food. And you'll remember toward the end of the novel, there is a kind of banquet in which people don't really talk, but they gather as a kind of social occasion. Food, in many, many instances in the Regency, then as now, was an occasion for bringing people together. So in Pride and Prejudice, it is cold meat and cake, and especially fruit. And Austen talks about this great pyramid of grapes and nectarines and peaches on the table to be enjoyed by the entire social gathering. One of the things that comes across in studying food and food consumption in the Regency is the amount of drink that was consumed. The Regency was a very hard drinking age. The regent was a very hard drinker. In the upper orders, it was wine. In Ireland and the Scottish Highlands, it was whiskey. In the agricultural districts, it was cider. On ships, the British military, it was grog. And in the urban lower classes, it was gin. Across the social hierarchies, meals were often accompanied by pretty staggering amounts of alcohol. You could be, if you were wealthy, a 6-bottle man, which meant that you consumed 6 bottles of wine after dinner was over. Of course, when dinner had finished, then out would come desserts. And there were all kinds of different trifles and custards and cakes and biscuits, gingerbread and plum puddings. What interested me the most was the extraordinary number of flavors of ice cream that were available for Regency pleasure seekers. It is remarkable how many different kinds of ice cream you could buy. So that is a very brief survey of food consumption and debates over food and food shortages and food excesses in the Regency period. I very much hope you enjoy Bath Heritage Days. Thanks for listening.